the letter wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to my wife. Her name on the envelope, her hands that opened it, her face that went completely still at the kitchen table while I stood behind her reading over her shoulder. But it might as well have been a grenade rolled across our floor, because after she set it down, neither of us said anything for a long time. Hearthstone Property Group had acquired our building. Effective 60 days from that date, our lease would not be renewed. We had until the 14th of March to vacate. It was November. My wife, Meredith, had lived in that apartment in Hamilton for 11 years. She'd moved in before we met, before we got married, before our daughter was born. That place had the original crown molding and old radiators that clanked through the winters like someone doing Morse code in the walls. We'd painted the nursery twice, once a pale green when Meredith was pregnant, then a soft yellow when our daughter decided she hated green at age 4. We had a life in that apartment. Not a perfect life, not a glamorous life, but ours. I called the number on the letterhead. A woman put me on hold for 14 minutes and then transferred me to a voicemail. I called again the next day and got a different person who told me, very politely, that the decision was final. The building had been purchased with plans for a full redevelopment. All tenants were being given notice in compliance with Ontario's Residential Tenancies Act. There was a moving allowance of 1 month's rent, which they were legally required to offer. He said it like he was doing us a favor. We filed with the Landlord and Tenant Board. Our neighbor on the 3rd floor told us she'd already done the same thing 2 weeks before us. So had the elderly man in 1B, the one who'd lived there since 1987. None of us expected much, and none of us got it. Hearthstone had done everything by the book. They always did. We had 2 months and roughly $40,000 saved between us. In Hamilton, in the middle of a housing market that had been climbing for 3 years straight, $40,000 would get you a down payment on something small if you were lucky, and we weren't lucky enough. We looked at condos. We looked at townhouses in Stony Creek and Ancaster. Everything either needed more than we had up front or more than we could carry month to month on my income as a tradesperson and Meredith's part-time hours at the clinic. The day we came home from the 3rd showing, a 2-bedroom in Binbrook with a collapsed carport and water damage in the master bedroom, listed at $620,000, Meredith sat down on the couch and didn't get up for an hour. Our daughter was at school. It was just the 2 of us, and the silence of an apartment we were going to have to leave in 38 days. That was when she pulled up a listing she'd bookmarked 3 weeks earlier and never mentioned. "I didn't show you before because I thought you'd say no," she said. She handed me her phone. It was a property listing out of Haldimand County, 112 acres of land near the lakeshore, with a small farmhouse on the northwest corner of the lot. The photos were not flattering. The front porch had caved in on one side. Several windows were boarded. The back roof had a visible sag. The whole thing looked like it had given up around 2003 and been resting ever since. The asking price was $104,000. I looked at her. She looked at me. "The land alone," she said, "is worth more than that." She wasn't wrong. Rural lakefront acreage in Haldimand was selling for significantly more per acre than this listing implied. I zoomed in on the address, then pulled it up in the county registry online. The property had been listed, withdrawn, and relisted 4 times over the past 2 years. The estate executor, some law office in Caledonia, had been trying to move it since the original owner died in the spring of 2022. Nobody wanted a farmhouse that needed more work than it was worth. Nobody with money wanted it, anyway. We were not people with money, but we were people being pushed out the door. We drove out on a Saturday, with our daughter in the back seat, asking questions we couldn't answer. The gravel road off the county line turned into 2 ruts through a field, and then into a clearing, and there it was, a century farmhouse with a wraparound porch that was listing badly to the left, windows that looked like they hadn't been washed since the previous decade, and a yard full of last summer's dead grass still standing knee-high. The barn behind it had lost most of its east wall. The old grain silo was missing its cap. Meredith got out of the car and walked to the middle of the yard and looked at it for a long time. "It has good bones," she said. I didn't say what I was actually thinking. What I was thinking was that it had exactly the bones of every project that takes 3 years and breaks your back and hollows out your savings and still isn't done when your friends come to visit. I'd done enough renovation work for other people to know what this place was. It was a commitment that would ask everything of you. I looked at my daughter, poking at a rusted fence post with a stick. I thought about the apartment, about the letter. We offered $98,000, and they took it by Monday morning. We moved in on the 12th of March, 2 days before our Hamilton lease expired. We loaded everything we owned into a rented truck and drove an hour and 15 minutes south and carried it all into a house that smelled like old plaster and something herbal we couldn't identify. Dried flowers, maybe, or some kind of root hanging in the basement. My daughter said it smelled like a grandma's house. She meant it as a compliment. The first 2 weeks were triage. Meredith and I worked from 6 in the morning until we couldn't see straight. The upstairs bathroom needed new subfloor. The kitchen had a section of ceiling that had to come down before it came down on its own. The east bedroom had settled unevenly and the door no longer closed properly. I patched what was dangerous, shored up what was sagging, and marked the rest with blue tape so I'd know the order of operations. My daughter, Nora, took it all in stride the way 8-year-olds do when you give them enough room to explore. She made the mudroom her territory. She found a horseshoe above the back door and decided it was lucky. She started a journal she called the house book, where she drew pictures of every room and rated them on a scale of 1 to 10. The kitchen got a 4. The attic got a 9 because she said it felt like a secret. I was measuring the main floor for new baseboard heating in the 4th week when I noticed it. I'd been working room to room with a tape measure and a notepad, trying to figure out the most efficient run for the new electric baseboard units. The farmhouse was a simple rectangle on the main floor, living room to the east, kitchen and dining area to the west, central hallway running north to south with a staircase at the back. I'd measured the exterior of the north wall from outside and marked it in my notes. 34 feet, 2 inches. Then I measured the interior. Living room east wall to kitchen west wall, measuring through the hallway, 29 feet, 8 inches. I wrote both numbers down and stared at them. 4.5 feet. I walked the hallway again. The central hall was narrow, maybe 3.5 feet wide. The staircase at the back was original to the house, a steep climb with a tight landing. On the right side of the hallway, there was a large built-in cabinet, floor to ceiling, painted the same cream color as the walls, fitted so tightly it looked like part of the original millwork. I'd assumed it was a linen closet. I'd opened it on move-in day and found 2 shelves with some old mason jars and a set of folded canvas tarps. I knocked on the back wall of the cabinet. It was solid. I knocked on the wall beside the cabinet. Also solid. I knocked on the section between the cabinet and the staircase. A stretch of wall about 2 feet wide that I'd never thought about because it was tucked behind the newel post and half in shadow. It was hollow. I'm a tradesperson by trade. I've worked on enough old houses to know the difference between a solid wall and a hollow one. This was hollow. Hollow in the way that suggested not insulation but open space, empty air. I called Meredith in from the kitchen. "Put your hand here," I said. "Now here. Tell me what you feel." She knocked once, twice, looked at me. "That's not the same," she said. "No," I said. "It's not." We both stood there looking at the wall for a moment. "Maybe it's just dead space," she said. "An old chimney chase? A vertical duct?" "The chimney's on the south end," I said. "And there's nothing on the blueprint." There wasn't a proper blueprint. The estate lawyer had provided a hand-drawn survey from the 1970s. But the main floor plan was simple enough. No notation of anything in that section of wall. Nothing in the property disclosure either. Nothing anywhere. I got a stud finder and ran it over the surface. I found framing at the standard 16-inch intervals, except in one section near the top, where the framing seemed to shift. There was a gap, a deliberate gap, from the feel of it, not a mistake in construction but a choice. I found the seam the next morning. I'd been looking at the wall in the wrong light. When I came down before sunrise with a flashlight to check on something in the kitchen, the angle of the beam caught the baseboard differently. And I saw it, a faint line running vertically about 8 inches from the edge of the built-in cabinet. Not a crack, a seam, intentional, fitted, filled with the same cream paint as everything else. A door, a concealed door, cut into the wall and painted over so many times it had become essentially invisible. I spent an hour looking for a latch before I found it. A small brass fitting recessed into the baseboard trim, designed to look like a decorative detail. You had to press it up and inward at the same time. When I did, the section of wall swung inward on old hinges that groaned like they hadn't moved in years. What was on the other side was a room. Not large, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with a low ceiling that cleared my head by about 3 inches. The walls were original stone foundation on 2 sides and old plank boards on the others. There was a bare bulb in a ceramic fixture overhead that didn't work. The air was cold and still and tasted like something very old. Not damp, exactly, but preserved. Like a root cellar that had been sealed. On the floor, pushed against the far wall, was a wooden trunk. Old, solid with iron fittings and a hasp lock that had been secured with a combination padlock. Beside it were 2 cardboard boxes that had gone soft at the corners. On the wall above the trunk, someone had mounted a small wooden plaque with words burned into it. What belongs to the land stays with the land. I called Meredith. She stood in the doorway of the hidden room and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Nora can't see this yet." "Agreed," I said. We brought the trunk out to the kitchen table. The combination lock was the old 3-wheel type, not sophisticated, just old. I tried the obvious combinations, all zeros, all nines, the year on the deed. Nothing. I spent the better part of that evening with a handwritten list of dates from the estate documents. Birth years, property registration years, the year the original owner, a man named Elias Holt, had purchased the land in 1963. 1963 didn't work. Neither did the year of his death. Meredith tried the year the farmhouse was built, which the survey listed as 1908. The lock opened. Inside the trunk, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept everything almost perfectly dry, were documents, a lot of them. There were personal letters tied in bundles with kitchen twine. There were ledgers, actual handwritten ledgers, the kind businesses used to use before computers, bound in dark cloth with dates on the spines. There were property maps, hand-drawn on drafting paper, with annotations in a careful, deliberate hand. There were photographs, black and white and then color as the decades shifted, of the farm and the land and people I didn't recognize. And there were other documents, more official-looking ones. Survey amendments, an easement agreement, a registered notice from 1987 from something called the Lakeview Agricultural Development Trust. I didn't know what any of it meant yet, but I knew Elias Holt had put it in a locked trunk in a hidden room and sealed it inside his wall. You don't do that with things that don't matter. Meredith called the estate lawyer in Caledonia the next morning. His name was Percival Morrow. "Percy," he said when she introduced herself. He was the one who'd managed the estate sale and had apparently never once set foot in the property. He'd dealt with Elias Holt's daughter remotely, and the daughter had since moved to the lower mainland of British Columbia. The estate had been settled. We owned everything on and under the property. Whatever was in that trunk was ours. Percy said, "I'm not sure I follow what you're describing." Meredith said, "A hidden room, Percy. Behind a concealed door in the hallway, with a trunk full of documents." A long pause. "What kind of documents?" he asked. That was the question, wasn't it? We spent the next 3 days going through everything. I'm not a lawyer or an accountant, but I grew up watching my father deal with enough small business paperwork that I can read a financial record. The ledgers, there were 5 of them, spanning from 1971 to 1998, told a story in numbers. Money coming into Elias Holt's farm operation that did not correspond to agricultural output. Not in any realistic way. A 100-acre dryland farm in Haldimand County does not generate the kind of income these records showed, not in the 1980s, not in any decade. the Lakeview Agricultural Development Trust appeared again and again, and then there were the easement documents. The original property survey had the Holt farm ending at a specific boundary line to the south. The hand-drawn maps in the trunk told a different story. They showed the original Holt parcel as including a narrow corridor of land, maybe 30 feet wide, that ran south for almost half a mile to connect to the lakeshore. A private access corridor to Lake Erie, one that did not appear on any registered survey we'd been given. I searched the county land registry online. The parcel we'd purchased was described exactly as I'd seen it in the listing, no southern access corridor. But one of the easement documents in the trunk was dated 1984 and referenced an amendment to the original parcel description. It bore the signatures of Elias Holt, a county registrar and an officer of the Lakeview Agricultural Development Trust, and it had never been filed. The original was sitting in that trunk, an executed, notarized document that had never made it to the registry, which meant, legally speaking, the amendment and the access corridor it described might still be valid. I took a photo of the document and emailed it to a real estate lawyer in Brantford, whose number I found through the Law Society of Ontario's online directory. I explained what we'd found and asked if he could look at it. He called me back within 2 hours. "Where did you say you found this?" he asked. "In a hidden room in our farmhouse," I said. Another pause. "I'm going to need you to bring that document to my office," he said. His name was Randall Quaife. He was in his 60s, the kind of lawyer who has seen enough that almost nothing surprises him. But when he spread the contents of that oilcloth on his desk and started reading, I watched something shift behind his eyes. He read carefully. He made notes. He called his assistant in and asked her to pull the land registry records for a specific range of parcels along the Haldimand lakeshore. She came back with a printout and set it on the desk. "Well," Randall said, "the 30-foot corridor described in Elias Holt's unregistered amendment connected not just to the lakeshore, but to a specific section of waterfront property that had, in 2019, been purchased by a development company called Blue Shore Capital for what the registry showed as a below-market acquisition. Blue Shore had since developed that waterfront parcel into a high-end recreational property, docks, a boathouse, a private road, and had sold portions of it through a series of numbered companies. The unregistered corridor ran directly through the middle of Blue Shore's access road. Randall sat back and looked at me. "What you may have here," he said, choosing his words carefully, "is an easement that was deliberately kept out of the registry. If that's the case, someone made sure this document didn't get filed. And given what that corridor affects, I'd say there was a specific reason for that. The ledgers," he said, "were a separate matter, but potentially a connected one. He had a colleague, a forensic accountant named Terrence Chu, who might be worth speaking with." Terrence was younger than I expected. He came to our farmhouse on a Tuesday in April, parked a sensible Honda in the muddy driveway, and sat at our kitchen table for 4 hours with the 5 ledgers spread in front of him. He barely spoke during that time. He had a system. He'd cross-reference entries in different books, mark pages with numbered sticky tabs, occasionally take a photo with his phone. When he finally looked up, it was getting dark. "These are pass-through records," he said. "Someone was running money through Elias Holt's farm. Agricultural payments that don't match any real output. The Lakeview Agricultural Development Trust, this entity, was the conduit. Cash in, cash out, different entries, same amounts shifted across different accounts." He tapped one of the ledgers. Elias kept his own parallel records. He wrote it all down. The entries, the names, the corresponding dates. My guess is he kept this because he was worried. Maybe because he was being coerced, or because he wanted insurance. Whatever his reason, he documented everything and locked it away. "Who are the names?" Meredith asked. Terrence looked at her. "One of them is a county official from the 1980s, a man named Dougal Fenn. He died in 2009. But a numbered company that traces back to his estate sold a lakefront parcel to Blue Shore Capital in 2019. And Blue Shore Capital's primary shareholder," he paused, "is a real estate development trust registered in Alberta. with one major institutional backer. He slid a page across the table. He'd written a name on it, Hearthstone Property Group. Meredith and I looked at each other across the table, the company that had bought our Hamilton apartment building and handed us a 60-day notice. The company that had, in their polite, legal, perfectly compliant way, ended the life we'd built and pushed us out into the cold. That company was connected, through a chain of numbered corporations and a dead county official and an unregistered easement, to the land we were now sitting on. I don't believe in fate. I never have. I'm a practical person. I believe in measurements and materials and things you can verify. But sitting in our farmhouse kitchen with the November dark pressing against the windows and those ledgers spread across the table, I understood something that I hadn't expected to feel. We had not ended up here by chance. We had ended up here because Elias Holt had spent 30 years quietly, methodically documenting everything, and then hidden it somewhere no one would find it unless they were looking very carefully at the walls. He had kept the truth inside the house, and we had been forced, by the very people it concerned, to find it. Randall Quaife filed with the Ontario Superior Court of Justice on our behalf in May. The claim had three components: the validity of the unregistered easement and our rights as property owners to the access corridor it described, the fraudulent suppression of a registered document, and a civil claim related to the financial records implicating Hearthstone's predecessor entities in the 1980s money cycling operation. We didn't expect it to be fast. Randall told us up front, this kind of litigation takes years. He also told us that what we had was unusually solid, because Elias hadn't just kept records. He'd kept originals. The unregistered easement document was the original notarized copy. The ledgers were contemporaneous, in a consistent hand, with cross-references that held up to forensic examination. There were no copies, no reproductions, nothing that could be dismissed as forgery. The one thing they cannot argue, Randall said, is that this was fabricated. It's too old. The paper, the ink, the notary seal, all of it dates properly. Someone buried the truth in a wall, and it stayed buried for 30-odd years, until now. The story got out before the court proceedings began. Randall had been careful, but Haldimand County is not a large place, and once the land registry was involved, certain things became public record. A reporter from a regional paper in Brantford called me one afternoon in June. I didn't give her much, but she filed something, and then a larger outlet picked it up, and then it moved the way things move now. Hearthstone Property Group released a statement through their communications firm saying they had no knowledge of the historical operations described and were cooperating fully with any relevant inquiries. Their spokesperson used the word legacy 3 times in 2 paragraphs, which I thought was interesting given the circumstances. The Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario opened a parallel inquiry. Blue Shore Capital's development certifications on the lakeshore property were put under review, and a class action was filed in September, not by us, not on our initiative, by a coalition of tenant advocacy groups representing former residents of 11 Hearthstone-owned buildings in Hamilton, Burlington, and Mississauga who had received non-renewal notices in the past 4 years. We settled our own claims out of court in the following March. The terms were confidential, which is standard, but I'll say this: we paid off the property in full. We put aside enough to cover Nora's university, and we had enough left to do the renovation properly. New windows throughout, the porch rebuilt from the foundation up, the barn stabilized and re-roofed, the electrical rewired to code. The access corridor, the 30-foot strip of land that connected our property to the lakeshore, was formally registered in our name in the spring. We walked it on a Sunday afternoon, the 3 of us, through the long grass and the wild raspberry canes that had grown in over the years, all the way to the water. Lake Erie in April is cold and gray and immense. Nora threw a stone in. Meredith stood at the edge and looked out for a long time. "I want to know about him," she said. "About Elias. We found out what we could. The daughter, Holt's daughter, had moved to Kelowna. She called us after the story went public, a long conversation, a bit stunned, a bit emotional. She hadn't known about the hidden room. She hadn't known about the trunk. Her father had never told her. What she told us was that he'd lived on that land for 60 years and never willingly left it. Not for holidays, not for family occasions in other cities, barely for groceries. He'd been there because he loved it, and also, she said, because she thought he felt responsible for it, like he had something to make right before he could leave. She asked if she could visit the property sometime. We said yes, of course. That September she came with her partner and her 2 adult kids, and we had a meal at the big table in the kitchen that I'd rebuilt from reclaimed boards off the old barn floor. Her father's trunk sat on a shelf in the living room. We'd kept it, sanded and oiled, and put on display. The plaque from the hidden room was there too, above the front door now instead of hidden away. What belongs to the land stays with the land. Nora showed Holt's granddaughter the housebook, all the drawings, all the ratings. The living room had been upgraded from a 6 to a 9. The porch, fully rebuilt, got a 10. The hidden room, for its part, we've kept. We cleaned it out, put in a proper light, sealed the gaps in the stone. It's a small room, but it's dry and quiet, and holds a remarkable amount of stillness. We use it as a reading room now. Meredith has a chair in there and a lamp and a small bookshelf. Sometimes on winter evenings when the farm is dark and the wind comes off the lake, she goes in there and reads, and I can see the light under the door from the hallway. When I knock, she always answers. Hearthstone Property Group was assessed a significant regulatory penalty by FSRA the following year. Their CEO resigned. The board issued a statement acknowledging, in the careful language of people who have talked to many lawyers, that certain historical business practices connected to predecessor entities did not meet current standards of conduct. The class action settled on terms that included a commitment to a 10-year tenant protection framework across all Ontario holdings. They never mentioned Elias Holt by name. They never mentioned us. But in the registered land documents, the access corridor carries our name now, and the easement that someone worked very hard to keep out of the official record sits, properly filed, in the Haldimand County Land Registry. The truth has a way of staying put. You can wall it up, lock it down, paint over it so many times it disappears into the surface. But it doesn't go anywhere. It just waits, patient and cold and perfectly preserved, for the right person to knock on the right wall and actually stop to listen.